everybody, and welcome to another Top 5 board gaming video. Today is not necessarily really a Top 5 video. Instead, it's rather a Bottom 5. In this case, I'm going to be talking about games that I really do not recommend if you are a new player in the gaming world, specifically the hobby gaming world, obviously. Now, the thing about these is that you could very easily just stick a whole bunch of like really heavy strategy and heavy Euro games into this and that kind of thing. What I'm thinking more of is not only the idea of important like strategic decisions that have to be made, not only that, but multiple things that you have to keep track of and all that kind of thing, but also just the mentality that you have to have in order to play one of these games, or simply knowing exactly what it means to play as a specific role in some of these cases. So some good examples would be, like Twilight Imperium is an obvious one. You do not want to play that right out of the gate. Same thing with something like Dominant Species. Dominant Species is a wonderful game. It's a ton of fun, but I mean, really it just comes down to it's an extremely difficult strategic game. And it's not a bad thing, it's a good thing, it's a great game, but for the purposes of this list, I wanted to expand out at least a little bit more in terms of what it means to be a new player and how it can be very, very difficult to just jump into some of these games. Now, that said, as I'm going through these, I'll explain why they're on this list, because for some of them, it's simply because there's a lot of decisions and a lot of things to keep track of that you need, and in other cases, it's because of very specific aspects of the game that make it difficult for new players, particularly playing specific parts of the game that make it difficult. But without further ado, and to eliminate all of the mystery for you guys, we'll go right on ahead into my number 5. At number 5, I have one of the 2 games on this list that I do not own. This is actually a Kickstarter game that is a very, very well-designed worker placement game that really, for me, has taken the genre to a very amazing and incredibly fun level. The game itself is Orleans, or if you want to be all-American about it, Orleans. This game, the whole point is that you have different types of workers, and you're going to do different jobs. You're trying to generate new workers. You're trying to use those workers to perform different tasks. You're exploring a map, essentially, all sorts of stuff. Just like many other worker placement games, this is one where there are a lot of decisions that you can make, but only a fraction of them that you are able to actually do. And in general, I would say worker placement games are difficult for new players, except maybe something like Kingsburg or something along those lines would be great as a newbie introductory worker placement game. But trying to do something like, for example, like Tuscany, or I don't remember the name of the expansion now. It starts with a V, though. It's another Kickstarter game that, unfortunately, I also don't own. I do own Kingsburg, though. But either way, worker placement games in general are very, very difficult, but in my experience, Orleans is one of the tougher worker placement games simply because you have different types of workers that have a very specific task, or they are required to in order to perform very specific things. Within this game, you have multiple avenues of victory, which is not unusual, but in this case, there are so many different avenues you can take and different ways by which you can go about doing them. It just makes decision upon decision upon decision upon decision that really can very, very easily overwhelm a new player. So I would definitely not recommend it for anybody who is brand new. If you want to do a worker placement game, though, definitely try something out like Kingsburg, or maybe Tzolk'in if you're a little bit more comfortable, but definitely not Orleans. It's a tremendous game, don't get me wrong, but just play a couple of other games before you jump into that one particularly. It is my number 5. At number 4, 4, I have a game that is one of several on this list that is really about the specific role that you are playing. And this is one that I debated about quite a bit because there are multiple games that do this. I ended up putting several of them on this list because I feel that they are distinct enough in terms of how you interact with the other players and how you're interacting with the game that it deserved its own spot. The game itself is Battlestar Galactica, and the role is the Cylon. Yes. If you are a brand new player to, whether it's a new player to co-op games or games in general, and you randomly draw that Cylon card, you probably have no freaking idea what to do or how to do it. And the problem is you can't really ask anybody, because then you give away what you are. And it means that the game becomes tremendously more difficult, because playing as a treacherous role means that you have to play a lot more subtly. And this game in particular is difficult enough. It's very difficult to win when you're really trying to win, but dancing the line between I'm really helping you guys and I'm being only slightly less helpful than I really could be can be extremely difficult. And again, especially as a new player, people are really going to be watching you and trying to help you out. And the thing is, it's difficult to not go with what they're telling you because you're a new player. And so, for one thing, you might not know the other options that you can do. For another thing, if you don't listen to them, then it very well could be that they're just like, oh, well, clearly you're a Cylon because you're not listening to us, or whatever it happens to be. Now, the obvious other thing for this game is its so-called sister that I always bring up whenever I talk about it is Shadows over Camelot. Because in Shadows over Camelot, you have a very, very similar trader mechanic, and the game itself has a similar progression in terms of if you have a trader, then you as the trader need to sort of toe the line between helpful and not helpful. And the thing is, it depends on the other players you're playing with. Sometimes they'll self-sabotage and you're just like, okay, yeah, whatever, I'm winning, whatever, this is all good. But then sometimes, you know, if the other people are winning, if the good guys are winning, then you're just like, well, I need to do something about this, but I don't know what. And it can be tremendously frustrating as a new person. So the reason that I have Battlestar instead of Shadows over Camelot is, first off, because I prefer Battlestar, and the other thing is that I find this to be slightly more complex. With Shadows over Camelot, you have the relatively clear idea of you're doing this quest, which means you have to play these cards at this time and do this, this, and this. It's a little bit more cut and dried, whereas with Battlestar, you've got a lot of different things going on simultaneously that you need to keep track of, and it can be extremely difficult to really make it work well. But either way, Battlestar Galactica, my number 4. At number 3, I have the other game on this list that I do not own, and it's actually very, very similar to my number 4 game, Battlestar Galactica. But in this case, it's a game that is actually really more considered a party game, and that is Spyfall. Again, it's the exact same problem, where if you are the spy, then you don't know really what you're doing if you are a new player. Like, for me personally, when I first played the game, I had had years of experience with hobby games. But the first time I played Spyfall, I was the spy. I had no clue what to do. And that's as a seasoned, experienced gamer. And so I can't imagine what somebody who is brand new to the gaming scene is coming in and just like, I don't know what any of this means, I don't know what I'm doing. And again, the problem is if you ask questions about like, okay, wait, what do I do if I'm the spy? Then it's just like, oh, well, clearly you're the fucking spy. Because why else would you ask that question? Now, for those of you who don't know, the idea behind Spyfall is everybody is at a location. And you have to ask vague but simultaneously specific questions to other people to determine if they are the spy. And at the same time, they need that vagueness because the spy is trying to figure out where you are. And it's it's difficult to explain, but suffice it to say, a good example is you're at the airport, right? That is the location. So you might ask somebody, how long have you been here? And then maybe they'll respond, a few hours. Okay, that's reasonable. You can be at the airport for a few hours. That is not an unusual time. But at the same time, you could say, I just got here. That's also very reasonable, because you could have just gotten to the airport. And again, the thing is that as the spy, trying to ask questions like that can immediately give you away, because it's very easy to ask something that ends up being way too specific. And at the same time, it's difficult as the spy to ask a question that's vague enough that will still give you adequate information. And on top of that, if people start getting suspicious of you and they essentially just keep firing questions in your direction, then you're just like, and then you get in even bigger trouble. And it can be very, very frustrating for a new person to the game, again, not even to the gaming community, but to the game itself, to be the spy within the first couple of games. It's tremendously hard. That said, the game itself really is good. Just like all of the games on this list are good games. But I mean, just getting that bad luck card as a new person and ending up being the spy in Spyfall, not really that fun. But either way, with all that, Spyfall is my number 3. At number 2, I promise, the last game that involves a specific role within the game. This particular one is a relatively recent release of a new edition of an old game for one that has a very, very popular and really, really cool hidden movement. I absolutely love this game. It is Fury of Dracula. Now, this particular one, this is the, I believe, 2nd edition, which was released by Fantasy Flight not too long ago. The problem is, again, this is about roles. If you, for whatever reason, end up being Dracula the first time around, it is overwhelming. I have played this game only once or twice, and the thing is, I still barely understand how the entirety of the game works. I don't know that I could play as Dracula. Not only are we talking about hidden movement where you're trying to move around the city and do this, that, and the other, but at the same time, you have like an army of monsters that you're controlling simultaneously. Dracula has the most responsibility in this entire game, and the thing is, if you have a poorly played Dracula, then the entire game is just kind of bleh. And it's just not nearly as fun as it really could be. Because, I mean, you want to have a good opponent. And essentially the problem with a game like this, where it's you or it's like a group against a single person, if you have that single person being, I mean, for lack of a better term, inadequate. I don't want to really say that word because it's mean, frankly. But if somebody really doesn't know what they're doing in this game as Dracula, then it can really just ruin the whole experience for everybody else. Whether it's, oh, I forgot to do this thing, I forgot to do that thing, or, oh man, I shouldn't have moved them there, I shouldn't have done this, I shouldn't have done that, then, you know, it just takes the whole experience away from the people who are trying to fight against the Dracula team. But again, as far as roles are concerned, this is really probably the worst, simply because of the responsibility involved with it. Now, there's plenty of other games that do similar stuff to this, so you've got things like The Resistance or Avalon or, you know, all of those games from indie board games and things like that that are similar to like Battlestar Galactica and Spyfall and things, but those are all very singular directed roles, whereas with this, you are a character. You have set a goal, and you need to actively attempt to achieve that goal in a very, very, I mean, really, it can be a very roundabout way, frankly. And the problem is, if you don't really know how to effectively go about achieving the goal for this game as Dracula, then you essentially screw the entire play for everybody involved. It's very, very unfortunate. But Fury of Dracula, my number 2. At number 1, I have a game that I have actually talked about in this exact context before, and really more often than not when I talk about this game, this is how I talk about it. The game is Diplomacy. Now, without a doubt, this is a game that you do not want to play if you are a new player. I highly, highly recommend that you do not do it. There is so much involved with this game. First and foremost, you need to set aside a work shift in order to play the thing. Anytime you have this massive time commitment, it can mean absolute devastation for any gamer, much less somebody who's new, especially if you're not a fan of like the theme. And I mean, the theme in this case is, you're talking about King of the Hill territory control. You're trying to control Europe. So, I mean, it's a fairly generalized theme, but by the same token, you can talk, I mentioned earlier Twilight Imperium. That's another game that is very famous for taking a long time. Same thing, like Twilight Struggle or Labyrinth. Very, very long games that, I mean, again, very heavily strategic as well, but, I mean, just the time alone can really start to wear on people. And in Diplomacy, it's particularly bad because the game itself is extremely simple. The mechanics for it are very easy. You build stuff, you move it, you fight. And then you see who's left. You have your 1-for-1. And boom, and they both blow up. And whoever's left wins. Like, that's it. It's extremely simple. It has very easy mechanics. The problem is the off-table, like, secret negotiation type things. If you are either not good or not used to doing things like that, this game will wring you out to dry. Or more to the point, your fellow players will wring you out to dry. Unless you have very, very nice other players, which, if you're playing Diplomacy, you are not playing with nice people because they want to play Diplomacy. This is a terrible game. It's not terrible. It's actually a really great game, but oh my god, it's painful. Like, it really is. It can be an intensely painful game. Just really depending on the players you're playing with. If you get a very good group that can at least somewhat help you along, that's great. But for me personally, I am always suspicious of people who are very helpful in Diplomacy, because it means that they got something sneaky going on behind my back. I just know it. But either way, as a newbie, I recommend that you stay as far away from games like this as possible. I mean, we're talking very heavy negotiation, very, very heavy time commitment, all of these kinds of things. By all means, that doesn't mean don't play it at all. It doesn't mean you can't play this as your first game ever. I'm just saying I don't recommend it. It is my number 1 game that is really not for newbies. Everybody, that's it for me. I hope that you enjoyed this video on my top 5 games that are really not for newbies. Whether you want to call it a top 5 or a bottom 5, doesn't really matter. Well, as always, I would love to hear your guys' thoughts and comments on this. What games do you hate playing as a newbie? What games have you seen people actually get devastated at as new players? I would love to hear your guys' personal stories. Absolutely amazing. I know that they're always great to hear. I have my own personal stories that really I can't fit into this video. I would be more than happy to discuss them, though. I mean, this is one of those that I think the discussion for us can really just frankly be a lot of fun. And I'm anxious to see your guys' thoughts and comments on all of this. I really want to hear about all of the games that you really cannot stand as a new player. I know I've said that like 4 times, but seriously, just do it. It's really fun. It'll be a great time. But either way, thank you so very much for watching, and I will see you next time. Thank you once again, everybody, for watching my video for my top 5 games that newbies probably should not play. I know that I kind of overdid it with the role-based ones, but again, you could very easily just stick a whole bunch of really heavy strategy, Euro games, all that kind of stuff on this, and get pretty much the same result. But again, I want to know from you guys, what do you not like as a newbie? What kind of roles in games and things like that do you not want to play like first straight out of the gate? What do you want to watch first? See a review, see a demo, all that kind of stuff. Leave it all in the comments below. As always, I've got several of my playlists linked up at the top of the page so you can see more of my work. And if you want to see even more from me in the future, click on the big giant subscribe button. With that, thank you very much again, and I will see you next time.